What do you think is the role of the governor in helping to deal with alleged environmental and coastal protection damage, if any, by oil companies? And is there an agreement you would want to see to settle this matter for the companies and the public for the future? Senator Vitter, you are first.
Robert, I think the role of the governor and DNR and state government in general is to set fair rules and to fully enforce them every step of the way. I would do that, and I would make sure all of our permits and all of our agreements and all of our contracts are fully enforced. However, I think that's very different than looking back 30 years, as some trial lawyers want us to do, and suing our partners from private industry when they had permits from the state and, according to DNR and state government, were living by them every step of the way. So I would not change the rules at the end of the game. I think that would be very destructive for our business environment in general. If we set that tone, if we exhibit that leadership, I also think there is enormous opportunity to partner in a proactive way with private industry. There's, quite frankly, from their perspective, a great PR opportunity for them to be partners on major coastal restoration projects. Every one of these companies, particularly the majors, has big budgets with regard to civic engagement, with regard to those sorts of endeavors. And I would institute a much more proactive, ambitious system of partnering with them so that we line up private sponsors and private partners and give them credit with regard to key coastal restoration projects. Finally, with regard to coastal restoration in general, we need to start making progress and putting shovels in the ground. We can't study this forever and study this to death. We need to start turning the corner. And so early on in my administration, I would identify some key early projects that can be key early wins to show that we are turning the corner, to build up hope and momentum, and to make additional progress.
Mr. Angel, your role as governor on this issue.
Well, the question to me is somewhat tricky inasmuch as it talks about allegations, and inasmuch as the allegations that you refer to have been made in lawsuits of which the state is not a party. I personally believe it's inappropriate for the governor to involve himself or herself in these so-called settlement discussions unless every single party called on his assistance. I can imagine how one side would feel if the governor decided to begin settlement negotiations about allegations in a lawsuit in the executive branch that was sitting in the judicial branch. I think that would send some shockwaves to the business community and as well as the public on what side the governor is on this issue. I believe, certainly I wish the suits would not have been filed. I think some of these things are better for the conference room than the courtroom, but nonetheless, we are there on some of these things. Certainly for those allegations that have not matured to the filing of a lawsuit, my record as a former parish president, my record as a secretary of the Department of Natural Resources working a variety of these issues, I think qualifies me to sit down with all sides. Again, I think once a lawsuit is filed, it's very difficult for the executive branch to reach into the judicial branch without all parties agreeing. So today I would want to make it very clear for those who have not filed lawsuits, I encourage you to go the route of the conference room rather than the courtroom, and I would make my conference room available to you. There was a point I thought we had actually passed the blame game, and we were working on an all-hands-on-deck towards the development and implementation of our state's coastal master plan, an award-winning coastal master plan. When we go back and look at what happened after 2005, the hurricane season of 2005, under my leadership and working with a variety of legislators, we established the CPRA, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, which has had a single focus of prioritizing and valuing the coast. This is a complex issue that will not be solved with one meeting in one conference room being dictated by the governor's office. It's something very, very important we have to invest in. I'm very, very concerned about a governor reaching into the judicial branch and trying to settle lawsuits.
Mr. Darden, your role as governor on this issue?
I don't believe it's a tricky question at all. I think the governor has to play a significant role in bringing everybody to the table. In my view, the lawsuit filed by the Coastal Authority should never have been filed. I don't know what the governor's role was in that ahead of time, trying to stop that from happening, because it doesn't make any sense. Violated one of the contingency fee provisions. It sued a party that really is not the right party to be getting the money. It left the state out, and all that's going to do is make a lot of lawyers very, very rich. I held up a list of 97 some odd law firms that are defending all the defendants in the case. In the preliminaries, no telling how much money was spent. The state's going to get brought into that lawsuit because we did issue permits. And so the state's going to be spending money defending a lawsuit that it ultimately was trying to get the money to help the coast. Makes no sense. The governor should have been involved. If it happened on my watch as governor without me knowing about it, I would have immediately tried to stop the situation, put everybody in a neutral corner, and try to mediate a resolution. We saw after the spill, BP had an awful lot of money that they provided to the state to mitigate damages by the tourism effort to what's happened in the Gulf of testing. A lot of that money went to a foundation. I advocated 2 weeks ago that I wanted to see a foundation established into which oil companies could make contributions dedicated to coastal erosion. This is important to the people and it's important to the people in Shreveport and Shongaloo as it is the people in Shack Bay and Chauvin, and it's just as important to the people in Sheboygan and Chicago what happens to Louisiana's coast. It's America's wetland. It's the biggest challenge we face in Louisiana right now. I chaired 2 committees for the America's Wetland Foundation to address this issue. I passed a constitutional amendment as a senator that dedicates a portion of the tobacco settlement, if we decide we want to sell it, to the coast. We have to have a proactive governor when it comes to resolving the issues on the coast, creating the fund base we need to once and for all attack the problem, save what can be saved, and make certain that we stop the constant erosion and loss of Louisiana and our ability to provide America and the world with oil, gas, and seafood, among other things. And just as an aside, the state needs to be in the business of promoting the use of CNG. It's in great supply in Louisiana right now, and governments need to be involved in using that product while we have such a natural supply available to us in Louisiana.
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Robert. And I'll give you the same answer this morning that I gave at an oil and gas forum. I believe that it is the governor's responsibility, and as governor, I certainly will sit down with oil and gas industry leaders and have a very frank discussion. First of all, do they agree that the exploration and production activities, principally the construction of pipelines and canals, contributed to coastal erosion? Just this week we got a letter from King Milling, who is the governor's, the chairman of the Governor's Advisory Commission on Coastal Protection, Restoration, and Conservation, and it says the impact of exploration, discovery, production, and delivery of subsurface hydrocarbon has also contributed to the present condition of our coastline. And that is consistent with reports that came from the industry itself. So I think you've got to sit down and have that conversation. You've got to try to figure out whether those activities did, in fact, comport with laws and regulations and permit requirements. And if not, is there a way to figure out what percentage of the coastal loss is attributable to those activities and what compensation oil and gas industries might feel is fair to the state? I think the governor has to do that because we know that the funding stream that we have is inadequate for the Coastal Restoration Master Plan, which requires $50 billion minimum over 50 years and would like to have $100 billion. And Go Mesa, the Restore Act, the BP fines are a tiny fraction of that. And the coast is a national priority because of fisheries, energy production, and otherwise. And we need to partner with Congress to try to find a revenue stream that will help us implement the master plan. That will be harder to do if we excuse people locally who are responsible for the erosion and ask the taxpayers in Iowa and Minnesota and everywhere else to make up for that. And so I think it's important that the governor take a strong leadership role on that and see whether negotiations will bear fruit. And that certainly is preferable to the courtroom, but obviously negotiations typically bear more fruit if the courtroom is the next option.